Okay, you're good.
And a very pleasant good morning to everybody out there. My name is Andy Lee, and I am honored and thrilled to once again be reading to you at Reed's Storytime at the beautiful Reed's Bookstore in downtown Tupelo. And if you haven't been here, my goodness, I suggest you come down here. Books for all ages and interests. Of course, being a former sports guy, still an avid sports nut, I'm staring at a couple books. I know you can't see them, but I'm staring at a couple books that really piqued my interest. Lou Gehrig, The Lost Memoir. A little fun fact, my great uncle was a professional baseball pitcher, and Lou Gehrig went 2 for 19 lifetime against my great uncle, so that's our little family claim to fame. And Mississippi's 100 greatest football players of all time. That might be a good one for Dad, a good Christmas present for Dad. Of course, all the John Grisham books and all the great holiday books for the kids, and that's what we're doing today. We've got some great holiday books lined up for all the kiddos out there, and got a couple Christmas books we'll get to, but Thanksgiving, we can't overlook Thanksgiving. It's a beautiful holiday. I know it'll be a little different this year, but it's still a chance to say thanks to for all that we have, spend quality time with family, eat some great food, and of course watch football. Yeah, that's always fun. So this Thanksgiving book I have chosen today is called Llama Llama Gives Thanks by Anna Dewdney. Llama Llama Thanksgiving. Falling leaves, a gathering. Many new foods to try, Brussels sprouts and pumpkin pie. Family, friends, yummy treats. Give thanks for all we have to eat. Grandpa gives thanks for blue skies above. Llama gives thanks for all those he loves. Thanksgiving is not just one day. Give thanks all year in every way. The end. So that was a short and sweet little Thanksgiving book. The appetizer, if you will, the deviled eggs and the things we eat before the turkey. All right, let's get into a couple Christmas books that I'm looking forward to reading. This one is called The Christmas Wind by Stephanie Simpson McClellan and Brooke Kerrigan, I believe would be the illustrator. The Christmas Wind. Go. The wind shoved Jo sideways, stealing, feeling from her fingers and toes. It chased her with ghostly moans and creepy shrieks. The day before Christmas and still no snow. She should have been glad, but the skinny road seemed colder without it. Jo hitched her baby brother higher on her hip. Leaving was the right thing to do, but the timing was bad. Her mother's eyes were slippery and her forehead shiny, and Christopher was still so new. The wind elbowed Jo's mother and kicked her to the ground. Stop it! Jo shook her fist at the sky. Ignoring her, the wind stole her scarf and blew out the light. Her plan was to be on a bus halfway to someplace else by now, but they weren't even close to the station. She pulled her mother to her feet. With a howl, the wind forced them off the road and into the prickly fields. So you see no snow, but very cold winter day. The farm to her left belonged to an old man as unfriendly as the wind. Franklin Murdoch. His very name felt like a curse. The loss of his wife and only baby on a Christmas Eve long ago had turned him so crusty and mean. Even grown-ups were afraid of him. Jo squinted toward Murdoch's barn. The old grouch won't be out on a night like this, she thought. Only those who are running from something would brave such a wind. Lean on me, Mom. There's a barn across this field. We'll start out again in the morning. Maybe you'll feel better. Maybe the wind will die. But when her mother steadied herself against Joe's shoulder, Joe feared she might drop her brother. Okay, she said, new plan. I'll get Christopher to the barn and come back for you. I'll be fast. The barn was farther away than it looked. The more the wind pushed, the more Joe stumbled. She said words she knew she wasn't allowed to say. Reading the yard, she hid behind a tree. Nothing the single light in the simple house, she darted to the barn faster than the wind itself. While it wasn't exactly warm inside, at least the wind couldn't find them in here. She wrapped her coat around her little brother and laid him in an empty manger. The cattle started lowing softly in the stalls around them, quiet braying and the gentle baa of sheep joined in and rose above the stalls in a kind of lullaby. Quiet yourselves, Joe whispered. So there she is in the barnyard with all the animals. The wind fought her all the way back to her mother. It jostled and bumped them as they limped and stopped and limped their way back to the barn. As she laid her mother in the hay, heat rushed to Joe's face. The manger was empty. Where is he? Joe eyed the cows. She darted from stall to stall and fished frantically through the hay. But Christopher was gone. Franklin Murdoch, remember the mean old man. This time Joe's words were a growl. Grabbing a shovel, she raged toward the house and peered through the window. Against the far wall, a wooden trunk spewed blankets and old photographs into the small room. An overturned bottle dripped milk off the edge of the table. The old man sat by the fire with his head in one hand and a crude wooden cradle at his feet. Joe pushed away from the window. She charged the front door and banged on it with her fist. The wind held its breath long enough for her to hear movement inside, but the door didn't open. She hammered louder. This time Murdoch opened the door for a crack, or opened the door a crack. There's the little girl and mean old Mr. Murdoch. Joe gripped the shovel like a weapon. "What are you doing with my shovel?" said Murdoch. "You stole our baby. Give him back right now or you'll be sorry." Murdoch frowned and reached for the shovel. She jerked it out of his reach. "Now." "I didn't steal any baby," said Murdoch. "I saw him with my own 2 eyes. That blasted wind carried his wailing right to my door," said Murdoch. "I saved him from freezing to death. What was he doing in my barn?" "None of your business." "My barn, my business." "Joe." "Where are your parents?" Murdoch asked. "Where do you live?" The wind shifted noisily as Joe looked the old man square in the face. She pressed her lips together and scowled. "Well, "You can't stay in my barn," Murdoch said. "Fine." Joe raised the shovel again. "Just give me my brother." And Will words under his breath. He raised the shovel in warning. "It's the three of us or nothing." "What are you doing out on a night like this anyway?" Murdoch struggled to his feet with Joe's mother in his arms. "Just be careful with her," said Joe. "Tell me your names at least," said Murdoch. "My mother's name is Mary. I'm Joe." As they stepped into the rising storm, the wind blew both ways at once and a path of light from a single star opened before them. Joe and Murdoch found themselves momentarily suspended between where they came from and where they were going, until an eager blast of air hurried them to the house. Joe tucked the shovel by the door and rushed to check on Christopher. Murdoch laid Mary on the couch by the fire and fetched some blankets. "She's had a bad cough for days," said Joe. "Can you phone a doctor?" "I don't have a phone." Murdoch glanced at the old photos still scattered on the floor. "But even if I did, no one will help on Christmas Eve." He turned his back on Joe and took a seat by the door. With his head in his hands, he stared at the floor. "What are you doing?" Joe planted herself in front of him. "You can't give up like that." She swept her arm around the room. "Things won't get better on their own." Murdoch lifted his head. The crumpled lines of his face rearranged themselves. "Yes, ma'am," he said, standing. The wind prowled in circles around the house as Murdoch brought a cool cloth and some medicine for Mary. He wanted some soup for Joe and laid out some bread and cheese. Mary tossed in her sleep and whimpered. Christopher cried and then quieted. Together, Joe and Murdoch kept the two of them comfortable and the fire blazing. As the sky deepened from violet to indigo, thousands of stars watched over the house. "Why don't you rest, Joe?" said Murdoch. "I'll stay up and keep watch." "Wait," Joe put a finger to her lips. "Listen." Murdoch looked from the baby to Mary and then back at Joe. "The wind," she said. "It stopped." There's mean old Mr. Murdoch with the baby, so he's a softy after all. Silence swaddled the small room. As Joe and Murdoch looked out the window, delicate white flakes flew towards them like a host of angels. Joe yawned. "You know," she said, "you're not really as horrible as they say." Murdoch snorted. "I guess they could say the same about you." "Who said I was horrible?" said Joe. Murdoch winked. He made a nest of blankets by the fire and tucked Joe in. Through heavy lids, she watched him cross the room to the window. With one hand on the sill and the other on his hip, he stood for a long time looking out. When pale morning lights slipped through the window, Joe opened her eyes. A scent fresh like frost and crisp like fruit mingled with the comfortable smell of the still crackling fire. Her brother made small sounds as he sucked on his fist. Her mother stirred and sighed. Murdoch slouched in a chair, bent sideways in sleep. So, thought Joe, he didn't keep watch after all. But then she looked around the room. Fresh cedar draped the window sills, and a Christmas tree leaned in the corner. Threads of straw wove like gold ribbon through the greenery, pinched in places by scraps of colored cloth tied into awkward bows. Silver spoons dangled from the branches, and presents wrapped in newsprint crowded beneath. Kneeling by the tree, Joe touched each package. One was shaped remarkably like the shovel she'd brandished the night before. "Merry Christmas, Joe," Murdoch said from behind her. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Murdoch," she whispered. Together they opened the door, marveled at the blanket of snow the Christmas wind had blown in. The world that stretched before them looked fresh and new. The end. Finally got their Christmas so, and Mr. Murdoch wasn't such a bad guy after all. Got a few more minutes here, so figure we're going to close with a Christmas classic. You've probably read the book, seen the movie. Of course, I'm talking about The Polar Express. The Polar Express, written and illustrated by Chris Van Allsburg. Originally written in 1985. On Christmas Eve, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a friend had told me I'd never hear. The ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There is no Santa, my friend had insisted, but I knew he was wrong. Late that night, I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing, steam, and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a train standing perfectly in front of my house. There it is, the Polar Express. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. The conductor stood at the open door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest, then looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe. I tiptoed downstairs and out the door. "All aboard!" the conductor cried out. I ran up to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, to the North Pole, of course," was his answer. "This is the Polar Express." I took his outstretched hand, and he pulled me aboard. The train was filled with other children in all their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered the quiet wilderness. There goes the Polar Express up north. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster, we ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. The mountains turned into hills, the hills to snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice, the great polar ice cap. Lights appear in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "is the North Pole." The North Pole, it was a huge city standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first we saw no elves. They are gathering at the center of the city, the conductor told us. That is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas. "Who receives the first gift?" we all asked. The conductor answered, "He will choose one of you." "Look," shouted one of the children, "the elves." Outside we saw hundreds of elves. As our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed to a crawl. So crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. When the Polar Express could go no farther, we stopped and the conductor led us outside. We pressed through the crowd to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing the silver sleigh bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound like nothing I'd ever heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart and Santa Claus appeared. Kris Kringle himself. The elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and, pointing to me, said, "Let's have this fellow here." He jumped into his sleigh. The conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee and he asked, "Now what would you like for Christmas?" There's Santa. A better shot of Santa Claus. Papa Noel. I knew that I could have any gift I could imagine, but the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's giant bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When I asked, Santa smiled, and he gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from a reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood, holding the bell high above him, and called out, "The first gift of Christmas." A clock struck midnight as the elves roared their approval. Santa handed the bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us, then disappeared in the cold, dark polar sky. There goes Santa and his reindeers. All the kids. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa Claus's sleigh. "Let's hurry outside and look for it," one of the children said. But the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way home. It broke my heart to lose the bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood at my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas," he shouted. The Polar Express let out a loud blast from its whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had my name on it. Inside was the silver bell. There was a note. "Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C, Santa Claus." I shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father, "it's broken." When I had shaken the bell, my parents had not heard a sound. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, but as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me, as it does for all who truly believe. There's the bell. That was the Polar Express. And that was my list of books. So once again, today I read Llama Llama Gives Thanks, the little Thanksgiving book. The Christmas Wind, a story about understanding. And of course, The Polar Express, a Christmas classic about a train to the North Pole. All these books available at the Reed's Bookstore. So I guess that's it. I'll sign off for now, and I'd like to thank Bennett, Jack, and everyone here at Reed's for allowing me this opportunity to read these books today. And we'll all see you around. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy Thanksgiving.